Should members of Congress be allowed to trade stock? Well, a bipartisan group of lawmakers says no, and they're pushing for a ban. Alex Brachet takes a closer look in this week's Facts and Figures.
Hey there, in this week's Facts and Figures, we are talking about stock trading in Congress. And right now there is a big bipartisan push to ban members of Congress from trading stocks. We heard from Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee before the first hearing on this in the House in more than 3 years. And, you know, he's pretty frank here. He said, we all know what's going on. Congress knows what the hell is going on, and it needs to stop. There is a bipartisan push from liberals like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez all the way to GOP hardliners like Chip Roy to ban members in the House and Senate from being able to trade stocks. This ban would also apply to their immediate families. And
okay, so here's something you don't see every day. Republicans are openly turning on each other and on President Trump in ways that are absolutely shocking to witness, even for people who have been following politics closely for decades. The party that spent years demanding absolute loyalty and brutally punishing anyone who stepped even slightly out of line is now eating itself alive in full public view with the cameras rolling. And Trump, the man who built his entire political brand on dominance and control and making everyone bend the knee to his will, is watching helplessly as his own hand-picked allies lash out at each other, and his iron grip on the party shows serious cracks that simply cannot be papered over or spun away anymore. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
it would give a timeline for those members of Congress to either sell or give away those assets. Now, notably, it does not apply to federal judges, the president, or the vice president. But just to get some context as to how folks in Congress are feeling about this, I spoke to former New York Congressman John Katko about this earlier this week.
Why in God's name should we be able to say, okay, we know that that's going to pass and may not be public yet, but I know it's going to pass, and then go out and trade on that information? It's just, it's bad, and it's bad policy to allow individuals to engage in stock trades. And the cold hard fact is, many people have left Congress much wealthier than when they got in there.
Now, current law requires that members of Congress disclose their trades within 45 days, but ABC News has tracked numerous times where members of Congress have been late with those disclosures, sometimes by even hundreds of days.
This isn't just normal political disagreement or the kind of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that occasionally leaks to reporters as anonymous quotes. This is open warfare within the Republican Party, playing out on camera and in public statements and official interviews that would have been completely unthinkable even a year ago when everyone was still afraid to cross Trump. We're talking about major figures openly questioning the leadership and calling for heads to roll. We're talking about Trump loyalists viciously attacking other Trump loyalists in ways that burn bridges permanently. We're talking about a party that looks less like a unified political movement capable of governing and more like a collection of warring factions that can barely stand to be in the same room with each other, let alone agree on legislation. And at the absolute center of all this chaos is the complete collapse of confidence in House Speaker Mike Johnson, who was supposed to be Trump's reliable ally, keeping the House Republican majority in order and pushing the conservative agenda forward through Congress. Elise Stefanik, who is the House Republican Conference Chair and one of the most prominent and visible Trump supporters in all of Congress, went on record in public saying that Johnson wouldn't have the votes to keep his speakership if a challenge happened today. Think about what that actually means for a second and let it sink in. One of the top 3 Republicans in the entire House, a close Trump ally who coordinates party messaging, is publicly declaring to reporters that the Speaker of the House doesn't have the support of his own party to keep his job. That's not subtle criticism or diplomatic hedging. That's a direct kill shot that signals the knives are out and everyone better start picking sides because this is getting ugly fast. Come on, this is absolutely wild to watch unfold in real time. The Republican Party controls the House of Representatives. With a majority they fought hard to win. They have the power that's supposed to let them set the legislative agenda and pass bills and investigate Democrats and do all the things they promised their voters they would do if given the chance. And instead of wielding that power effectively to achieve their stated goals, they're spending all their energy and attention fighting viciously with each other about who's in charge and who's to blame for everything going so catastrophically wrong. It's like having the keys to the car you always wanted and then spending all your time screaming at each other about who gets to sit in the front seat while the vehicle sits motionless in the driveway going nowhere. And the problems extend way beyond just Johnson and his failed speakership. Marjorie Taylor Greene announced she's resigning from Congress entirely, but made crystal clear she's absolutely not going quietly into the night. She's going to stay vocal and keep stirring things up and causing problems for Republican leadership from outside the institution. That's exactly the kind of move that signals deep and fundamental dissatisfaction with how things are being run and a willingness to burn every bridge on the way out the door. When your most aggressive and loyal attack dogs start leaving the team while promising to keep biting, something has gone seriously and perhaps irreparably wrong with your coalition management. The electoral warning signs are flashing bright red as well and adding urgency to all the internal panic. Trump's endorsed candidates are still winning their races technically, but by much narrower margins than anyone expected or predicted. The Tennessee special election that just happened should have been an easy blowout victory in deep red Trump country, where Republicans typically cruise to double-digit wins, but instead they barely held on by a few points, while Democrats dramatically outperformed their historical numbers in ways that stunned observers. That kind of unexpected underperformance in what should be a completely safe district sends a very clear and alarming message about the national political environment and about whether Trump's political magic is still working the way it used to. And Trump himself seems genuinely stunned and rattled by all of this chaos, based on multiple reports from inside the White House and from people who've spoken with him recently about the state of the party. He's accustomed to being the one in total control, the undisputed leader everyone rallies around without question, the kingmaker whose endorsement is a golden ticket and whose criticism is an instant death sentence in Republican politics. But now he's watching his own carefully constructed party apparatus fall apart in real time, watching his hand-picked allies turn on each other with shocking viciousness, watching his approval rating sit at a brutal 36%. That suggests even some of his previously rock-solid base is finally abandoning him. The dominance and invincibility he projected for years is visibly crumbling, and there's not much he can do about it from the White House while Congress tears itself to pieces. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly what's happening inside the Republican Party and why it's blowing up so dramatically right now at the worst possible time. Let's get into it. All right, let's get into the specifics of what's happening, because the Republican Civil War that's erupting so publicly has multiple fronts and deep roots that help explain why things are falling apart so dramatically right now when they need unity most. This isn't just one isolated problem or one personality conflict between difficult people. It's a systemic breakdown of a party that never really figured out how to actually govern effectively, while also maintaining the purity tests and absolute loyalty demands that Trump's leadership style requires from everyone around him. The immediate flashpoint that everyone is focused on is Mike Johnson's speakership and the widespread recognition across the party that he's failing at the job in ways that are becoming impossible to hide or spin away, no matter how hard they try. Johnson was never supposed to be speaker in the first place, if you remember how he got the job. He was a relatively obscure backbench member who emerged as a surprise compromise choice after Kevin McCarthy was dramatically ousted and multiple other, more prominent candidates failed to secure enough support from the warring factions. He was acceptable to the different Republican groups precisely because he was an offensive and unknown, a generic conservative without the baggage or accumulated enemies that more visible figures had built up over years of combat. But being inoffensive enough to get elected isn't remotely the same as being effective enough to actually lead, and Johnson has proven himself completely unable to manage the competing demands of his deeply fractious conference. The government shutdown disaster that we covered extensively in previous videos was the most visible and embarrassing failure, but it was really just a culmination of months of building legislative dysfunction that everyone could see coming. Johnson couldn't get his members to agree on basic spending priorities that should have been routine. He couldn't prevent hardliners from tanking bills that the broader party desperately needed to pass. He couldn't maintain working relationships with moderates who felt constantly ignored and steamrolled by the Freedom Caucus types. He couldn't keep the trust and confidence of the various factions who all wanted fundamentally different things and weren't willing to compromise their positions for the good of the team. By the time the shutdown actually happened, and Johnson went on television to desperately blame Democrats for a crisis his own party's dysfunction clearly caused, any remaining confidence in his leadership had completely evaporated. Elise Stefanik's public statement that Johnson wouldn't have the votes to survive a speakership challenge is absolutely devastating, precisely because of who she is and what she represents in the Republican hierarchy. Stefanik isn't some random backbencher shooting her mouth off to get media attention and raise her profile. She's the conference chair, the third-ranking Republican in the entire House of Representatives. She's a close and trusted Trump ally who coordinates party messaging and legislative strategy at the very highest levels. She wouldn't make a statement that explosive and damaging without knowing it would land as a major blow to Johnson and without being extremely confident that many of her colleagues throughout the caucus share her negative assessment of his leadership. When leadership publicly contradicts and undermines leadership this directly and this brutally, it signals that the internal debates have moved far past any hope of private resolution and into open warfare that everyone can see. The dysfunction extends far beyond just Johnson's personal failures to fundamental and perhaps irreconcilable disagreements about what the Republican Party should actually be doing with its power and how it should be pursuing its goals. The hardline Freedom Caucus types want maximum confrontation on every single issue: government shutdowns, impeachment proceedings, endless investigations, whatever it takes to own the libs and keep the base energized and donating money. The moderates in swing districts desperately need to show their constituents that they can actually govern competently and get practical things done, which inherently requires compromise and deal-making that the hardliners immediately view as betrayal of principle. And caught uncomfortably in the middle are the bulk of members who generally align with Trump's agenda but don't want to be associated with constant chaos that makes them look incompetent and hurts them back home. This fundamental tension between the factions has existed for years, obviously, but has gotten dramatically worse under the current configuration for several important reasons that compound each other. The House majority is razor thin after the last election, which means any small group of even 5 or 6 members can effectively hold everyone else hostage by threatening to tank votes the party needs. The various factions have become more entrenched and ideologically rigid over time and far less willing to defer to leadership for the sake of party unity. And critically, Trump's own increasingly erratic behavior and his declining political strength have significantly reduced his ability to impose discipline by threatening punishment for disloyalty. When Trump was riding high with strong approval ratings and unquestioned dominance of the entire party, members fell in line quickly because crossing him meant certain political death in their next primary. Now, with his approval sitting at an abysmal 36% and multiple scandals simultaneously dragging him down, the fear factor that kept everyone obedient has significantly diminished. Members are doing their own calculations and concluding that they might survive crossing Trump, or at least that the risk of his displeasure isn't as terrifying as it used to be. Marjorie Taylor Greene's announced resignation from Congress adds yet another layer of drama and uncertainty to an already deeply chaotic situation within the party. Greene has been one of Trump's most vocal, aggressive, and visible supporters throughout her time in Congress, a constant combative presence on cable news, defending him against all attacks and viciously going after his enemies with everything she had. Her decision to actually leave Congress while simultaneously promising to stay heavily involved and keep causing problems signals profound dissatisfaction with how things are going inside the Republican conference. She's essentially declaring that she can be more effective stirring things up and causing trouble from outside the institution than she can working within a system she finds hopelessly frustrating and dysfunctional. When your most aggressive and reliable attack dogs start voluntarily leaving the team while promising to keep biting, something has gone fundamentally and perhaps irreparably wrong with your coalition management and team dynamics. The electoral warning signs from the Tennessee special election have added tremendous urgency to all of these internal debates and recriminations about what's going wrong. Tennessee is about as deep red as Trump country gets, a state where Republicans should absolutely cruise to easy landslide victories without even really trying or spending significant resources. Instead, the Republican candidate in the special election won by a much narrower margin than any historical pattern would predict, with Democrats dramatically outperforming their baseline in a district that shouldn't have been remotely competitive under any normal circumstances. That kind of significant underperformance in what should be one of your safest seats sends a very clear and alarming warning about the national political environment and about whether Trump-aligned candidates can actually hold on to genuinely swing districts where the margins are much closer and the electorates are much less forgiving. Republicans who are looking honestly at the Tennessee results and at Trump's 36% approval are starting to do uncomfortable electoral math that's creating panic throughout party leadership. If they're substantially underperforming, even in safe seats, what happens in the actually competitive districts that will ultimately determine House control next year? If Trump's endorsement isn't the magic electoral bullet it used to be, how should candidates in tough races position themselves relative to him? If the constant chaos and dysfunction in Washington is turning off persuadable voters, how do vulnerable incumbents defend their records when their party can't even keep the government open or agree on basic legislation? Okay, so let's break this down into the key points that everyone needs to understand, because this Republican Civil War has major implications for governance, for the 2026 elections, and for the broader political trajectory of the country over the next several years at least. Point number 1, the public attacks on Mike Johnson from within Republican leadership signal that his speakership is effectively over as a functional matter, even if he technically keeps the title and the gavel for now. When Elise Stefanik, the conference chair and close Trump ally, publicly tells reporters that Johnson wouldn't survive a speakership challenge if one happened today, she's not just casually offering an opinion or engaging in idle speculation. she's issuing a formal declaration that he's lost the confidence of the caucus and everyone should act accordingly. That kind of devastating statement from that level of party leadership doesn't happen by accident or get easily walked back with a clarifying statement later. The question now isn't whether Johnson is a strong and effective speaker. Absolutely everyone knows he's not and hasn't been, but whether Republicans can actually agree on anyone else who would do better given their fundamental divisions. Given their demonstrated inability to agree on anything at all, finding a consensus replacement seems extremely unlikely, which means they may be permanently stuck with a deeply wounded speaker everyone acknowledges is ineffective, but nobody can replace. Point number 2, the structural problems causing this chaos aren't going to be solved by simply changing leadership because they're fundamentally built into how the Republican coalition is currently configured and how the various factions relate to each other. The deep tension between hardliners who want maximum confrontation on everything and moderates who need to show practical results is absolutely fundamental to the current makeup of the party and can't be wished away. The razor-thin majority that gives any small faction of 5 or 6 members effective veto power over the entire legislative agenda can't be changed by any internal decision. It's just the math they have to work with. The differing incentives facing members in safe deep red districts versus those in competitive swing seats create inherent conflicts that no speaker can possibly resolve through personal skill alone, no matter how talented they might be. Even if they somehow replace Johnson tomorrow with a hypothetically more effective leader, that new leader would immediately face the exact same impossible task of managing irreconcilable demands from factions that fundamentally and sincerely disagree about basic goals and legislative strategy. Point number 3, Trump's significantly diminished ability to impose party discipline is both a cause and a consequence of the current chaos in ways that create a self-reinforcing cycle of weakness that's very difficult to break. Trump used to be able to end internal party debates simply by declaring what he wanted and threatening severe punishment for anyone who dared cross him. That worked effectively when his approval ratings were high and his political power seemed absolutely unassailable to everyone watching. Now, with his approval cratered at 36% and his endorsed candidates noticeably underperforming expectations, members are calculating that they can probably survive crossing him politically, or at least aren't as terrified of his displeasure as they used to be when he seemed invincible. And as they act more independently and create more visible chaos and dysfunction, it further undermines Trump's carefully cultivated image as an all-powerful leader who completely controls his party, which makes future discipline even harder to impose. The feedback loop is accelerating in a direction that weakens Trump's position more with each cycle. Point number 4, the Tennessee special election results are exactly the kind of serious warning sign that should deeply alarm Republican strategists about their realistic prospects in 2026, but that the party seems completely unable to respond to effectively because they're too busy fighting each other. When you dramatically underperform your historical baseline in a safe seat in the absolute heart of Trump country, something is clearly going wrong nationally that affects your chances everywhere on the map. The math for holding the House majority in 2026 depends entirely on winning competitive swing districts where margins are much closer than deep red Tennessee. If the national environment has genuinely shifted against Republicans because of Trump's deep unpopularity, because of constant legislative chaos, because of accumulated scandals, they could very easily lose enough seats to hand Democrats the majority. And right now, instead of urgently addressing that obvious threat, they're spending all their energy and attention fighting bitterly with each other over leadership and blame. Point number 5. Marjorie Taylor Greene's resignation and explicit promise to remain vocal and disruptive from outside Congress represents a troubling new phase of Republican infighting where the internal conflicts spill far beyond the institution itself and become even harder to contain. Greene leaving while loudly promising to keep attacking and stirring things up means the internal warfare doesn't stay internal anymore, it goes public and permanent. She has a massive media platform and millions of engaged followers who will hear every criticism she levels at Republican leadership. She can say things as a private citizen that would be awkward or inappropriate to say as a sitting member bound by institutional norms, and her very public departure may encourage others who are similarly frustrated with the dysfunction to follow the same path, leaving Congress but continuing to cause major problems for the party from outside. The centrifugal forces pulling Republicans apart are clearly getting stronger over time, not weaker, and there's no obvious mechanism to reverse that trend. The implications for Trump's entire legislative agenda are absolutely devastating because nothing significant can realistically pass through a House this fundamentally dysfunctional. Major tax legislation requires unified party support that doesn't exist. Immigration bills require negotiation and compromise that the factions can't achieve. Spending priorities require basic agreement on what matters that members can't reach. None of that is remotely possible when members can't even agree on who should be leading them or what general direction they should be heading. Trump may technically have the White House and nominal Republican control of Congress, but he effectively has no viable legislative path forward while his supposed allies are spending all their time fighting each other instead of fighting Democrats. For Democrats, this entire situation is an enormous political gift that they're watching develop with barely concealed glee and active preparation to exploit. They don't have to work particularly hard to make Republicans look bad and incompetent when Republicans are doing it to themselves so thoroughly on national television every single day. The campaign ads for 2026 essentially write themselves. Just show the footage of the chaos and the infighting and the shutdown and ask voters whether they really want these obviously dysfunctional people to continue running the House of Representatives. Every single day that Republicans spend fighting internally is a day they're not effectively making their case to persuadable voters or implementing policies that might actually improve their political standing. Looking ahead to what might possibly break the current deadlock, the honest answer is that nothing obvious will resolve these deep tensions in the near term because the problems are structural rather than personal. The fundamental conflicts between factions are real and deeply held and aren't going away. The structural incentives pushing members in different directions based on their district characteristics aren't changing. Trump's political weakness removes the one force that used to be able to impose discipline through fear, and the rapidly approaching 2026 election creates additional pressure that will likely intensify conflicts rather than encourage unity as members start prioritizing their own individual political survival over any party coordination. The most likely scenario is continued chaos and dysfunction through the remainder of this Congress, with occasional moments of forced cooperation when absolutely necessary, like must-pass spending bills that trigger automatic shutdowns, but no significant legislative accomplishments to point to, and constant internal warfare that dominates media coverage and public perception. Republicans will limp awkwardly toward 2026, having failed to deliver on most of their major promises while fighting publicly with each other in ways voters can easily see. Whether voters ultimately punish them for that obvious failure depends on many factors, including what Democrats do with the opportunity, but the current trajectory is decidedly not encouraging for Republican electoral prospects. The broader lesson emerging from this mess is about the fundamental limits of a political coalition built primarily around loyalty to one dominant personality rather than shared principles or policy goals. Trump completely reshaped the Republican Party around himself, his personal grievances, his enemies, his priorities, his style of politics. That worked effectively for electoral purposes for a while, but created a party that's fundamentally dependent on his personal strength and charisma and completely unable to function coherently when that strength noticeably wanes. Now that Trump is clearly weakened by multiplying scandals and historically low approval ratings, the coalition is fragmenting rapidly because there's simply no unifying principle or positive agenda holding it together beyond personal loyalty to him. Anyway, that's where things stand with this Republican Civil War that shows absolutely no signs of ending anytime soon. The open attacks on Johnson from his own leadership team, the structural dysfunction that no leadership change can actually fix, Trump's diminished ability to impose order on his own fractious party, the electoral warning signs that should be alarming everyone paying attention, the high-profile departures and defections that suggest even deeper underlying problems, and the rapidly approaching 2026 elections where all of this dysfunction will be tested against actual voter judgment. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is going to keep developing dramatically as the internal conflicts play out and as the electoral implications become clearer over the coming months. Whether Republicans can somehow miraculously pull themselves together or continue their very public implosion, whether Trump can reassert control or continues watching helplessly, whether Democrats capitalize effectively on the opportunity or fumble it away, all of it will unfold over the coming months in ways that will shape American politics for years. And if you think the Republican infighting is bad right now, just wait until the actual midterm campaign really gets going and everyone starts desperately positioning for their own survival. I'll see you in the next one.